I couldn't confront him. Not yet. I needed time to think, to process everything. But the more I thought, the angrier I became. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, and the pain was unbearable. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching from the sidelines as Mark and Elena carried on as if nothing was wrong. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let him destroy everything we had built without facing the consequences. I would make him pay, make him feel the pain I had felt. The next evening, I waited until Mark left for one of his late nights at work. I knew where he was going, and I knew what I had to do. I drove to the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I parked a few spaces away from his car and waited. When Mark and Elena finally emerged, laughing and holding hands, I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had ever experienced. I followed them as they walked to a nearby park, their voices carrying on the cool night air. They stopped by a small pond, and I watched from the shadows as they sat on a bench, their heads close together. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the months of pent-up anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. But in that moment, I snapped. I stepped out of the shadows and approached them, my footsteps silent on the grass. Mark saw me first. His eyes widened in shock, and he stood up, his mouth opening to say something. But I didn't give him the chance. I pushed him, hard, and he stumbled backward, his arms flailing as he lost his balance. There was a splash as he hit the water, and then silence. Elena screamed, but I barely heard her. I stood there, frozen, as Mark struggled to stay afloat. He called out to me, his voice filled with panic, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched as the water closed over his head, his cries growing weaker until they stopped altogether. The police arrived quickly, but by then, it was too late. Mark's body was pulled from the pond, his lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. I told them it was an accident, that he had slipped and fallen. They believed me, and the case was closed. But I knew the truth. I had killed him. I had let my anger, my pain, consume me, and in that moment, I had taken everything away from him, just like he had taken everything from me. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on, to rebuild my life. But the guilt was a constant weight, a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't escape the memory of Mark's face, the look of betrayal in his eyes as he sank beneath the water. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. I sat up, my heart racing, and looked around the room. It was empty, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It was Mark's voice, calling my name. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but the voice only grew louder. And then, I saw him. Mark was standing at the foot of my bed, his clothes dripping wet, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He reached out to me, his hand cold and clammy, and whispered one final word, "Why?" I screamed, but no sound came out. I tried to move, to run, but my body was frozen. Mark's hand closed around my wrist, his grip like ice, and pulled me towards him. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Mark's face, twisted with anger and sorrow, as he dragged me into the darkness. The next morning, my body was found in the pond, my lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. The police ruled it a suicide, but the truth was far more sinister. I had been consumed by guilt, by the weight of my actions, and in the end, it had destroyed me. The house we had shared stood empty, a silent witness to the love, betrayal, and tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. And if you listened closely, late at night, you could still hear the whispers, a haunting echo of a love that had turned to darkness, and a goodbye that would never be forgotten.